President Trump and Attorney General Barr were outraged by the DOJ recommending 9 years in prison for Roger Stone, and so should you. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about the Justice Department and its treatment of Roger Stone. He's a friend of President Trump's, and he was convicted of lying to investigators and witness tampering in the House Intelligence Committee's investigation of the Trump campaign. They thought President Trump and his campaign were Russian agents. They had hacked the DNC and John Podesta emails and put the emails onto WikiLeaks. And this was basically because of the DNC and Hillary Clinton funded dossier by former British spy Christopher Steele that alleged that Trump was a bought and paid for Russian agent, that Carter Page and Paul Manafort had worked with Russia on the DNC and Podesta hacks. And helped put the emails onto WikiLeaks. This led to the FISA warrants against President Trump and Carter Page and the campaign, basically where they had access to the campaign's emails, text messages, phone calls, and other documents. And it led to the FBI investigation of eventually the Trump administration. When President Trump found out about the extent of the investigation, he fired former FBI Director James Comey. Comey lied to President Trump. He said that Trump wasn't a subject of the investigation. It turns out that Trump was the subject of the investigation the entire time. And what Mueller ultimately found after Comey was fired was that President Trump and his campaign were innocent all along. There was no conspiracy with Russia. And so the basis for investigating and questioning the Roger Stone or George Papadopoulos or Michael Flynn, that they never would have even been questioned but for this investigation. Mueller found there was no conspiracy with Russia, though. From the Mueller report, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, and, quote, the evidence does not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. So none of these people should have even never been questioned. There should have never been an investigation. And now the ink is barely dried on the acquittal of President Trump and the Congressional Democrats' impeachment inquisition of him and their attempt to remove him from office, which failed. Now it's right on to the next thing, this time faux outrage that the Justice Department reduced its sentencing recommendation for Trump friend Roger Stone from 9 years to simply leaving it up to the judge to decide. The only reason, again, Stone was being investigated, the only reason he was ever questioned was because of these false allegations. There never would have been an investigation, and Stone, Flynn, Papadopoulos, they wouldn't have been convicted of lying to investigators. And that is why when news broke that the Justice Department was recommending 9 years for Stone, President Trump was blasting the decision. And he said on Twitter, quote, this is a horrible and very unfair situation. The real crimes were on the other side, as nothing happens to them. Can't allow this miscarriage of justice. Also, and a swamp creature with pull was just sentenced to 2 months in jail for a similar thing that they want Stone to serve 9 years for, a phony Mueller witch hunt disgrace, caught. So President Trump was clearly outraged. The same day, the Justice Department apparently agreed with President Trump and amended its filing in U.S. District Court in the District of Columbia, calling the sentence recommendation excessive and unwarranted. This was a filing again on February 11th by the Justice Department. They amended it and they said, we're going to leave it up to the judge. You decide what the sentence is. We think 9 years is too much. Quote, while it remains the position of the United States that a sentence of incarceration is warranted here, the government respectfully submits that the range of 87 to 108 months presented as the applicable advisory guidelines range would not be appropriate or serve the interest of justice in this case. The government respectfully submits that a sentence of incarceration far less than 87 to 108 months imprisonment would be reasonable under the circumstances. The government ultimately defers to the court as to the specific sentence to be imposed. Now, the filing noted that the initial recommendation of 9 years was akin to sentences received by violent offenders. Roger Stone's not a violent criminal. Quote, the sentencing guideline enhancements in this case, while perhaps technically applicable, more than double the defendant's total offense level and as a result disproportionately escalate the defendant's sentencing exposure to an offense level of 29, which typically applies in cases involving violent offenses such as armed robbery, not obstruction cases. And just like that, the left, the Washington, D.C. establishment, they went crazy. Now you have a petition from over 2,000 former Justice Department officials who are urging Attorney General Barr to resign. They say that he's given Stone preferential treatment. Quote, it is unheard of for the department's top leaders to overrule line prosecutors to give what they say is preferential treatment for Stone. But if you look at the law, Attorney General Barr has clear authority to look at litigation and to tell the U.S. attorneys what to do. 28 U.S.C. 519 states, quote, the Attorney General shall supervise all litigation which the U.S., an agency, or an officer thereof is a party, and shall direct all U.S. attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys, and special attorneys appointed in the discharge of their respective duties. Meaning if Attorney General Barr determines that there's a miscarriage of justice, a malicious prosecution, or in this case that a sentence recommendation was too excessive, he has a responsibility under the law to oversee those U.S. attorneys and to make course corrections, basically. Now, there is a question about the president's own involvement in this decision by tweeting about it, but under Article 2 of the Constitution, sole vesting of executive power in the president, plus the charging of the president to faithfully execute the laws, we elect presidents to enforce the laws and to ensure that rights are not being violated in the administration of justice. Trump clearly has the power, therefore, to direct subordinates, including the Attorney General, if he felt there was a miscarriage of justice taking place. In this case, that was unnecessary, though, because the Justice Department ultimately came to the same conclusion as President Trump, that the sentence recommendation was excessive. 9 years was too much for the crimes that Stone was convicted of. Under Article 2, President could actually pardon Stone, and it would be well within the scope of his constitutional powers, something Trump just reminded everyone of with the commuting of sentences as well as grants of clemency to 11 individuals. He just did that on February 18th. And that, pretty much just to remind everyone, hey, I could just pardon Roger Stone. I don't need to go, on Twitter to talk about this. And it would be well within the scope of his powers. I would also note the historical record shows that presidents have always been involved in the administration of justice and prosecutorial decisions. This is a long-standing precedent. Here's Sai Prakash. He writes the chief prosecutor in June 2005 at the University of San Diego Public Law and Legal Theory Research Paper Series. He writes, quote, Presidents Washington, Adams, and Jefferson repeatedly directed official prosecutors, instructing them to prosecute some individuals and to cease prosecuting others. Early presidential direction of prosecutors was based on an understanding of the executive's constitutional authority, for no statute ever authorized presidential control. In presidential proclamations, in addresses to Congress, and in correspondence, presidents often noted that they had given instructors to official prosecutors, sometimes articulating the constitutional basis of their actions. Attorneys general likewise acknowledged that they were executive officers under presidential control and regularly conveyed presidential instructions to district attorneys. So the complaint against Trump is not based on any law being violated, but that in the execution of their legal authorities, both Barr and Trump had agreed that 9 years for Stone was excessive, and so did the U.S. attorney named in the filing, Timothy Shea. And apparently agreeing with the president about the horrible conduct of the Justice Department in 2016 with the phony Russia collusion witch hunt is a crime against the Washington, D.C. establishment, indeed a crime against the swamp. You can't speak out against the Justice Department. You can't question James Comey's decision-making in investigating President Trump. You can't question the Steele dossier. You can't say that Roger Stone was excessively sentenced or the recommendation was excessive. No. That's a crime against the establishment. And I'll leave you with the close here. The argument appears to be that even if the sentence recommendation was excessive and Trump was right, because Stone is his friend, Stone needs to be punished. He's the president's friend. The president can't get involved, even if there's a miscarriage of justice. Even if the sentence is excessive, because he's the president's friend, then any interference by the president is going to be, a high crime, a misdemeanor, or something like that. Therefore, he must be punished far in excess of the law. of what the law prescribes, because justice is equal, and neither the president nor the attorney general have any role in supervising the administration of justice. Apparently, due process does not apply to supporters of the president because, like an animal farm, some are more equal than others. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.